Hi there, how are you doing? Now, you are in yet another very important lesson. This is super important, and in this video, we're going to cover execution context and scope chain. It doesn't have to be super complicated. In fact, it is very easy and straightforward. That's what I think, and this should help you understand exactly what you need to know. And I'm sure you will believe in me that it's not super complicated thing. So the execution context of a variable or function defines what other data it has access to. Okay, for example, we might create a function. Okay, so this function, in order for this function to work properly, it might need to go outside of its own area, okay, outside of its own scope, and then find this variable, that variable, this function. So this, when we create a function, for example, let's create a function color update. All right, so this is the function. Okay, we create a function, so within these two curly braces it creates its own scope. Okay, so this is the execution context of this function. This is its own context. Okay, then that's how we're understanding it. Execution context of a variable or function. So this is a function, we can assign it to a variable as well. Variable whatever equals to function, we can do that as well. This is called function expression, and we're going to come to it later. Okay, so for the moment, so this is a function, we call the function. So in its two curly braces, it creates its own scope, and that is the execution context. So it defines what function defines what other data it has access to. For the moment, there is nothing there. We come back to that. Okay, for example, let's create a variable color equals to blue. Okay, so this variable is not in the context of this function. This is outside of the function, so it becomes a part of a global function. Okay, global execution context. So it becomes part of a global execution context. So global execution context is the outermost one. In web browsers, it is the window object. Okay, so all the variables, functions defined like this, they become part of the global window object. So let's give it a try. This variable color should be available in window object. So let's go here. Okay, window dot color undefined. Okay, did I save this? Let me save this. Come here and refresh. Window dot color, and you can see it's blue. So this variable has been available in the global context, in the window object, which is the outermost one. Okay, and this function also creates its own context. For example, let's create another variable inside this function. Variable another color equals to red. So I create this variable another color, but this one, because this is inside the function's execution context, it's not available in the window or the global execution context. So it is available, color blue is available, but another color should not be available. Let's give it a try. Refresh. So window color is available. Window another color. Let's see if it is available. No, that's why it says undefined. So as you can see, two different contexts. This is in the global context. This is in its own context. We covered these two. Not that hard. Okay. Now scope chain. So what is scope chain? When code is executed in a context, a scope chain is created. Why it's created? Its purpose is to provide access to all variables or functions needed to execute to the execution context. So for example, this function, this is the execution context. If it requires access to, for example, let's say this variable, which is out of this context. So how does it access? That's when behind the scene JavaScript in JavaScript, the scope chain is created. Okay, so if it need access to the global execution context where there is a variable color, for example, let's say return color. So I have another color, but this function is trying to return the color which is not in its own scope but out of its scope. It's in the global context, not in its own context. So that's when scope chain is created behind the scene. So let's say if it works, return color. Let's say if it has access. Console log. And we simply calling the function, no arguments passing, nothing, because this function is simply returning the value that is available in the global scope. Return blue. Yep. So this function, out of this own context, it can reach out. That's possible because of the scope chain. Okay, it creates behind the scene whenever necessary. So this chain continues as needed until global execution context. If it doesn't find this color variable within its own context, then it goes out. If I create, for example, variable color equals to purple. Now in this case, I have a variable color available in its own context. So it will not go out and look in the global execution. No need to, because source begins from within, from its own arguments object, and if it doesn't find that, only then it goes out. So this color should return purple now. Yep, it returns purple because it found the color, even though they named same, it found in its own scope, so it didn't bother going to the global execution, didn't go out. Okay, so this chain continues as needed, so that's why it wasn't needed, so it didn't go, but it continues as needed until global execution is reached, which is the window object. This is a big deal in when you're learning, but really it's not that complicated. In fact, it is very, very straightforward. So hopefully it has been pretty clear to you. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the very next video.